Hi, my name is Gray Garland. I'm a multidisciplinary artist, and today I'm going to give you a walkthrough of some of my old sketchbooks and talk about the evolution of my art style and my art practice. Okay, future me cutting in, because as you can see here, like, you can see some of my drawings over there. I've drug out, like, this other one over here, this canvas piece I'm going to show you later. This video ended up being chaos, because, hi, Bubby. You guys never get to see my beautiful baby cat, so here's Biggs, my little black baby. Hi, what do you smell? What do you smell? Say hi to the people. He doesn't want to cooperate. He's an Aries Sun Libra Moon who does not want to cooperate ever, so that's the most you get from him, and you're lucky that you got to see him. He usually steers clear because he's like, you gotta pay my SAG fee if you want me depicted in any of these videos. But anyway. So this video was crazy to film. It was such chaos because I realized that, like, I've had like a very sort of chaotic practice over the years, going back and forth between mediums and stuff. And I forgot. How could I forget? It's because it's all one to me. Like, I don't see a clear separation between my creative practice and my magical practice. I forgot that I'm really giving you guys like an introduction into my magical practice. So whenever I'm going through my original hypersigil journal, especially, you will see a lot of like channeled writings and just a whole bunch of chaos from this magical spell that I've been creating. But I wanted to talk a little bit about how, you know, I said at the beginning of this whole filming process, this was a hypersigil that I've been creating for most of my creative practice. Once we get to 2024, beginning of 2024, all of the drawings I'm going to show you, I was intentionally undertaking as magical workings to bring about this God self that I was channeling and to bring about my dream world, to manifest my dream world. And so once I started all of these drawings and writings, all of these practices, these manifestation practices, in January of 2024. By the time April rolls around, I am already starting to see the results of that spell manifesting. Like, I already started to grow an audience on Threads. All of these like incredible, magical, creative people, some of them that I had been admiring from afar for years, started paying attention to me online and actually becoming my friends. And I started this new substack in June. And suddenly it was racking up like hundreds of subscribers and all this stuff. Like, it was taking off. And really, the work that later became Birthing the God Self, my series on hypersigil work and on embodying the God Self to make your most magnetic art, all of the ideas put forth in that series, I really started working on them around May of 2022. But a lot of what actually became like the final form of those rituals and those ideas came from like my hypersigil journal that I'm going to show you today. Like, they came from that evolution of my creative practice. And so like now, all of this stuff that at the time I was writing in my hypersigil journal, just totally delusionally, like, you know, as if the gods give a shit about me and as if people give a shit about me and as if I'm some genius. All of that stuff that to me just seemed like an utter fiction is now becoming real. So I talk a lot about hypersigil work, and my visual art practice is very much an extension of my hypersigil work. A hypersigil can be any type of art. It can be writing, it can be drawing, it could be sculpture, it could be dance, it could be performance. Anytime you are creating art out of the God self or creating art of the world that you would like to manifest, you are making a hypersigil. You are pouring all of your energy into that spell, all of your attention, all of your focus, so that you are charging it and it will eventually become real. And I have had quite a fantastical experience of this process, which we will get to after I sort of go through my old sketchbooks and talk about the beginning of my work and how I was set down this path. But to start out with, let's talk about how I got into visual art. Now, drawing, just like pretty much everything else I do, is something that I've just been doing since I was a kid. You know, whenever I was a kid, I tell clients and stuff that all of my work on embodiment really comes from my childhood of acting, playing pretend, and making art of my inner world. I was really in like embodiment boot camp growing up, and I didn't even realize it. Like as a kid, every single day I would wake up and the very first thing that I would do is I would go to my little like box of costumes and I would put on my costume for the day. And I would immediately launch into my inner world, into my inner play space, and begin acting out a character or something. And as I was going through my day in my imagination, I would write poems, I would draw pictures, I would make art from that inner world that I was channeling and from these energies that I was channeling. And I just didn't know that's what I was doing. And whenever I started doing plays, like school plays, pretty much immediately. Whenever I was in kindergarten, I was selected for like the main female role in my grade's school play, because in my elementary school, every grade would do their own little play every year. And I remember at the time being quite shocked. I mean, I was in kindergarten. I didn't really know what my aptitude was for anything, you know? But also, I was like a very shy child. I was very boisterous and gregarious with people I felt comfortable around. But I was bullied from a very young age, and I was very quickly like driven inside myself. So the fact that I was selected for this role that was on stage through the entire play and that had all of these like lines and stuff, I was like shocked. But I remember being very excited about it and very like enthusiastic about my role. And it just sort of took off from there. I did a bunch of school plays, church plays. And by the time I was 12, actually, no, I was 11 when I did my first theater boot camp. And I got like the starring role. We did The Hobbit and I got to play Bilbo. And I just remember like, you know, not to brag, but I just remember everyone being really wowed by me. And like the theater director, like just really laying it on thick that I had some kind of talent for acting. And so the very next year, the first opportunity I got to try out for one of the community theater plays, which was separate from the workshops. The workshops, you pay to put your kid in there. They're going to get a part. They're going to get some kind of part. Community theater, you know, it's up to the director of who they think is good to put in. And just immediately I started getting main roles. Like I did not have to pay my dues at all, which is quite unusual even in like community theater. I had like an extraordinary talent for acting and for embodiment, as I later found out. And so I did community theater for a couple years. I did school plays. And of course, at home, I was making lots of visual art. I was writing a lot. These were sort of my main creative pursuits. And in 9th grade, I dropped out of school. And I mainly dropped out of school, for one thing, due to some intense trauma things that I had going on, but also I later found out as an adult that I am autistic and ADHD. And I was suffering not my first, but probably my most severe burnout. And luckily, my parents were cool with just taking me out of school. And the plan was loosely that I would homeschool myself, but we didn't know I was autistic. We didn't know I was ADHD. We didn't know that I have no executive function to speak of. So immediately I had trouble organizing myself and getting things done. But I had no trouble learning. I did tons of like research on my computer every single day. Like I did a lot of research into psychology and technology. I later went on to study software engineering in college. All of these like little interests that I had, I was constantly learning about them, constantly giving myself an education in that regard. And I also began to give myself an art education. And I will never forget, whenever I was like 15, I saw the movie Vicky Cristina Barcelona. It's a Woody Allen film. F. Woody Allen, but that movie is still the blueprint for me. Because even though I did not, I did not covet the super dysfunctional throuple that is central to the film, I did covet their way of life. The fact that like all these people just were waking up and making art every day, like going out and photographing the city by day, painting by night. Like I loved the multidisciplinary, bohemian sort of lifestyle that I saw depicted there. And I was like, I want to get serious about this. I want to learn to paint. I started getting into sculpting. I started doing all of these things and really trying to take them seriously and look at it as like giving myself an art education. And, you know, luckily I grew up with YouTube and all of these wonderful resources. So that was totally possible for me. And after a while, I really settled into my favorite medium was pen and ink drawing. And I really just enjoyed, what I initially got into was Zentangling, which if you don't know what Zentangling is this method of meditation that's loosely based on the mandalas that Buddhist monks do, very loosely. And the idea is that usually when you get started out in Zentangling, you either are working from a book or Pinterest has tons, and did at that time have tons of resources for different like patterns that you can learn. And you weave these patterns together into a whole. Sometimes people do them in various shapes, like an octopus made out of Zentangle patterns, and sometimes it's just very free form. And it's a very, very fun meditation. If you've never tried it, I highly recommend it. And this was a great way to start learning abstract drawing, because anyone who has done visual art for a long time knows that really anyone who's done anything, you start out by imitating. You imitate what you see. And then after you get comfortable and confident and your brain sort of reverse engineers other people's style and other people's methods, that's when you start to generate your own. So pretty quickly, I abandoned all of the preset patterns and started like coming up with my own patterns. So I started out Zentangling, and then whenever I was in university, all of this just sort of fell by the wayside. I did not have like a whole lot of time for drawing. I did, I think, 1 or 2 drawings while I was in university. Eventually, I got to a point where I hit another really bad burnout. My health was also falling apart. I was going through a really traumatic, some really traumatic stuff with my family. There was a lot happening in my life. I had also recently moved to Dallas from like my small North Texas town. And I was really going through this like massive shock of change. And I found that like pretty quickly, I ended up dropping out of university, and I needed something to do with myself. You know, I've always been the type of person that like, I have to be working on something. I have to have some kind of project. I can't just exist and maintain my sanity. So I decided I'm going to get back into visual art, and I'm going to do exactly what I did as a teenager. I'm going to take it very seriously, and I'm going to start trying to make art every day. And so this was around the end of 2017, beginning of 2018. And around the end of 2017, I was doing a lot of like portraiture, just kind of like trying to see, is there a different direction that I maybe want to go in with visual art? You know, I was at this kind of interesting pivot point. So I was experimenting with a lot of different mediums and different ideas. And then around the beginning of 2018, I just started to miss plain black and white pen drawings, and I really wanted to go back to that. So I was like, I'm going to start a sketchbook of just these pen drawings, and I really want to finally, for the first time in my life, fill a sketchbook, because previously I have struggled with perfectionism really bad over the years. So I was really bad about ripping pages out of my sketchbook when I didn't like them, giving up on drawings halfway whenever I would start to get triggered and think, oh no, this is sucking, or like, what am I doing? And I really wanted to stop that. I really wanted to rewire that habit. So I started doing this thing where every single time I would start a drawing, I would commit to finishing it. No matter what happened, no matter what misstep I made, I would commit to finishing the drawing no matter what, and I would find a way to work the errors in, because I do have like a sort of abstract art style, as we'll see in a moment. And so I was like, how can you be messing up when you're doing abstract work? There are no mistakes, like they're just opportunities. So I really tried to commit to every single time I started a drawing, I finished it all the way through. And it was massively challenging for me. This was a huge confrontation to my nervous system. And I remember a lot of times where I would either be staring at a blank page, like, dear God, what do I do? What if I start wrong? Like, what if I mess this up sometime through? I would be like freaking out in my head. Or I would be staring at a half-finished page like, ooh, I like this so much. Now what? Now where do I go from here? And what if I mess up all of the stuff that I have made that I actually like by doing something bad? And I was just constantly like battling it out with my inner perfectionist and really learning to relate to them for the first time. Because whenever you force yourself to move through those sorts of blocks instead of just ripping out the page, starting over, moving away from the trigger, from that uncomfortable moment and those uncomfortable feelings coming up, that's when you finally learn how to work through them. That's when you finally find resolution for those old traumas and those old wounds that are sticking you up. And you learn how to be in relationship with that inner perfectionist and show them that there's nothing to be afraid of. Because one thing that I like to say to my clients is that, like, your inner perfectionist is really just your inner editor. And they become the inner perfectionist because they're trying to protect you from repetition of traumas that have completely upended your creativity in the past. They are trying to protect your creativity and your creative fruitfulness. They're just doing it in a misguided way. And they're overcompensating for the fact that there is no single unified adult part or system of adult parts within yourself who can help you move through that discomfort and who can support you when things do go wrong, when you do fail, whenever you do meet with like difficult circumstances in the outer world, like when people criticize your work, or when you make something that you don't like, or like maybe whenever you apply to art school and you don't get in, like all of these sort of situations. The inner perfectionist is overcompensating for a lack of internal resources to deal with those kinds of stressful, triggering situations. So whenever I began actually moving through my perfectionist tendencies and really being present with what those voices were saying to me, I started learning how to support them through the process so that my inner perfectionist could go back to being my inner editor and could just be sort of like quiet on the sidelines when she needed to be, and then step forward to say, hey, I think we need to change what we're doing, when she actually had the opportunity to be helpful and to help guide the process in a productive way. So between 2018 and late 2020, I had this daily art practice, and I did go through periods where I was inactive. Because one thing that I talk about a lot is that for the traumatized nervous system, your nervous system will tend to become hypersensitized to your creative energy. Because in the past, maybe you've experienced burnouts, or you've had experiences where that creative energy or big, highly sensitizing energies in your system completely collapse you. They exceed your nervous system resources so that you end up in a freeze state, so that you end up in total nervous system collapse, needing all of this intense rest and feeling afraid and unable to be present with yourself because you lack the nervous system capacity to be present with yourself. And so the nervous system, genius that it is, it learns to circumvent this by noticing when there's a big engine of desire, of creative inspiration, of creative movement happening in the system, and it shuts it down before it ever becomes a problem, before it ever exceeds nervous system capacity. And so a lot of creatives will go through these periods where they're very creatively active, and then they hit a really bad freeze where, and I want to differentiate this because it is normal as a creative to go through periods of activity and passivity. You will go through periods where you're making a lot and you're having a lot of ideas, and then you'll go through periods where you are metabolizing inspiration, digesting past creative projects, and you're just sort of like in a rest period doing some unconscious processing before you're ready to move into the next active phase. You will know the difference between a nervous system freeze and a passive period. Because when you're in a freeze, there are levels to which you can be in nervous system freeze. So it could be an entire shutdown where like you lose the ability to do your daily routine, you lose the ability to do all of your self-care tasks, you are like literally frozen in bed. Or you can just notice that like you're in more of a functional freeze where you're just kind of barely getting through your daily tasks, maybe like some of your self-care tasks and your routine is falling by the wayside. But mostly you will feel in your body that shutdown and that fear of being present, that fear of being alone with yourself, alone with your thoughts and feelings. You might find that when you try to be present with your thoughts and feelings, you completely shut down, that like your brain is devoid of thoughts. You just kind of zone out, you dissociate. So there's a very big difference between a freeze state and a state of passivity. But a lot of artists do notice that they go in and out of these freeze states because they are so sensitized to their own creative energy and because they have not built trust with their nervous system that it is safe to feel and move that creative energy. So I would go through these periods of freeze states. I would be in and out of these freeze states. I would be able to draw daily for like a month, 2 months, maybe 3 months, and then I would hit another bad freeze for a couple months. But for the most part, from 2018 to the end of 2020, I kept up with a daily drawing practice. And at the end of 2020, I had another reemergence of a lot of past trauma. I was going through a lot of things, feeling a lot of things that I had not been present with for many years, reprocessing a lot of events in my life. And it was a really, really severe period. And so I started studying art therapy, and I began learning about the benefits of using liquid media for processing emotions, for dialoguing with emotions. And I also saw the potential for this to really help with my perfectionism because of the lesser degree of control that you have over fluid media. So I started doing watercolor paintings, I started doing acrylic paintings, and I really stepped away from my drawing practice to focus on these things for a while. And I did this for, I think, about 6 months. And then I more or less took a vacation from my creativity, from my like visual art at least. I did like from time to time experiment with some digital art and different things of that nature. I would go back to painting. But I didn't really have a consistent creative practice, and I really felt estranged from the sort of thread that I was following with the art that I made, from like whatever my art style and the world that I was creating was. I was really just exploring my inner self, my emotions, and really using art as a tool to dialogue with all of these different parts of self that I had abandoned, or some that I've never even really made contact with, that I have just been chronically estranged from for years. And then in 2022, that's when I really got into digital collage, and I really started making a lot of digital collages as my main form of art and as my main art practice. And at the time, I was working on a project, and that was sort of the place where all of these digital collages were going to. I was working on a writing project with a friend, and we were using these images to go with articles as assets, like various things of that nature. So that was the bulk of my practice. And then at the end of 2022, we hit sort of a lull in that project. And that's when I started going back to drawing. That's when I started going back to my pen drawings and sort of like getting back into that extemporaneous sort of improv style of drawing, where I really just touch pen to paper, make lines and shapes, and then divine into those shapes, kind of like you're looking into clouds and seeing what you see in the clouds. And I found myself again dealing with my inner critic, my inner perfectionist, and having major breakthroughs in moving through those thoughts and feelings. Whereas I feel like for years, whenever I was present with those thoughts and feelings, I didn't even have the nervous system capacity to be fully present with them. I really just got used to noticing them and forcing through them and like actually just disconnecting from that part and enforcing my will on it instead, which I think this was like a necessary interim skill before I built the nervous system capacity and I built other resources for dialoguing with these parts, but it was not a good long-term strategy. So around the end of 2022 is when I really started working through all of that stuff and started getting to a place where I could start making my best work. I was not quite there yet, but I was getting a lot closer. So through most of 2023, I did not have a lot of time to work on drawings. And then it was at the beginning of 2024 when I started my hypersigil notebook. That is when I started drawing again. I was like, I really want to use this journal as an opportunity to get a daily drawing practice back. You know, even if it's just like 15 minutes that I got to do a tiny little doodle, that's what we're gonna do. And so I finally got back into a daily drawing practice. And something about this journal, you know, immediately this journal was magic. I had used it to incarnate one of my spirit guides to act as sort of as a servitor, as like a helper. And as soon as I started to write in there to do all of my writing practices where I was channeling the God self and I was building out their energy and their mythos and working on my manifestations, I did a lot of like future journaling where you write as if you're in the future that you want to manifest. And as soon as I began writing in this notebook, I immediately found that it was the most distanced I had ever been from my inner critic, from my inner perfectionist. And I developed this entirely new approach to drawing, where previously in my art, everything had sort of been their own self-contained elements layered on top of each other. Now, all of a sudden, everything was sort of morphing together, and I was like really experimenting with combining different shapes and different textures, not leaving like hard edges and lines around everything and layering them together, and instead leaving everything very open, working just on texture and then building shape around it, building outline around it, so that everything really was constantly morphing and shifting into each other. And there was really no hard separation between elements. It really looked like everything in the drawing was in the process of mutating. So that's when things really blew up for me. And all of a sudden I started making this incredible work like nothing that I had ever made before. I felt like a whole new bitch. Like, I don't know how to describe it. I felt like I had this incredible flow now in my drawing practice. And it immediately translated to me working a lot faster, whereas previously it would take me weeks to complete a drawing. It was a very painstaking process. Now I found that I could complete a drawing in like an hour and a half. And the other thing too is I stopped being so precise with my line work. And you're gonna see that when I show you some of my old drawings and you see the transition from then to now. I stopped being so precise with my line work. I stopped trying to make really clean lines, and I allowed my natural tremor, the little shake that I have in my hands, to come through and give everything a little bit of a craggly, more organic texture. And I really started embracing, I now call my drawings scribbles, because I really started embracing the messiness and the expressiveness and really valuing that expression of my internal emotion, of my internal feelings over the end result and over like this very pristine product and over technique. So that sort of brings us to today and where I'm at with my art style now. And I just continued to do my little scribbles and explore my little inner world. And so now I want to talk a little bit about how I get in the headspace for this artwork, about what I feel like I'm channeling, sort of where the art comes from. In late 2017, I read the book Annihilation by Jeff Vandermeer, and I've written about this in an article, this spiritual awakening that was kicked off from reading this book. Because they never come right out and say it in the book. It's kind of addressed in the Alex Garland movie. But I feel like a better way to describe it is what's happening in Annihilation in this Area X, where there's some kind of strange phenomena, there's a force field surrounding it, people disappear into it and they don't come back out. There's strange flora and fauna within Area X. The whole novel centers around this mysterious Area X and what's going on in there. And major spoiler alert, skip ahead if you don't want spoilers of this book. But what turns out to be true is there is an alien presence that is terraforming this area. And it's really creating like a fractalization of all of the nature, all of like the actual DNA of the surrounding nature. And in a way, it's sort of dissolving the blocks in our human consciousness and in animal consciousness that causes us to believe that we are separate. That it's like, we all come from the collective unconscious, and we are all a part of the collective unconscious. We might all be individual drops of water, but eventually we all dissolve back into that ocean of consciousness, which we were never truly separate from. We just perceive ourselves to be separate because we live in a dualistic reality. We came to incarnate here in the 3D, where everything appears separate and where we can experience contrast. And so this alien consciousness in Area X sort of acts to dissolve the mental boundaries that lead us to believe that we're separate. And we see this in the novel reflected in the actual flora and fauna of Area X, in the surrounding nature, that things begin to mutate, beings begin, like animals begin to mutate, the plant life begins to mutate, everything is sort of morphing together and like alchemizing into these entirely new plants and animals, these entirely new beings. And I was very inspired by this novel because it felt like it spoke to something that I had always experienced, but had never had the words for. And I have found over the years as well, since I have dealt with my chronic dissociation, I have come into deeper presence and deeper capacity for presence with my body, with myself, with nature, that I feel this sense even more so, that like, we are not separate from the trees and the plant life and the animals. We really are all part of that universal consciousness, part of the anima mundi, or the world soul. And so my art really reflects that. That has really been the major inspiration behind my art, is trying to depict a world where everything is morphing together, everything is like mutating into something new. And there is no clear separation between one thing and the next, between one plant and the next, one being and the next. And so I consider everyone to be psychic. I think everyone has latent psychic ability that can be honed and practiced and brought forward. I do consider myself to be a natural psychic, that I have a certain degree of natural talent for psychism. Through my drawings, I have been able to channel messages of the future. I've gotten book recommendations. I actually have this one piece called The Sun is the Seed that I have pinned up over there. And whenever I was drawing this piece, because, you know, my drawings are all channeled, they're all spontaneous, I don't plan anything out. As I was drawing this big sort of rosette-looking shape in the center, I heard this voice in my head say, "The sun is the seed." And I did not know what that meant. I thought that it was maybe just coming forth as a title for the drawing. And I later found out that one of my favorite artists and mentors, Rick Rubin, I have been a huge fan of his work, producing for other artists for years. He's really become known as the guy you go to as a musical artist to break you out of a creative block or to help you reinvent yourself. And his methods are fascinating. I found out that he had written a book, The Creative Act, A Way of Being, and on the cover was the sun glyph in astrology. And there was a chapter on seeds that gave me some very important confirmation about a creativity course I was writing at the time that has become the foundation for all of my work going forward. So the message that I got was directing me to this perfectly indexed part of a book. And I've had stuff like that happen over the years. But it's like, some of my art, especially my writing, I do try to get into a state of embodying the God self when I write it. I do various practices like meditation and intuitive movement. My drawing practice also can be part of how I get in the headspace to make that art. But I try to get in a certain headspace and get into a certain state of embodiment from which to channel for some of my work. Most of my drawing is not like this. Sometimes, because I consider my visual art sigils, sometimes I do make a sigil with a specific goal, and I will encode that energy into the sigil, and I will bring that energy forward in my consciousness and really try to bring it down into my body through different practices before I get started so that I can really transmit that into the image. But for most of my art, I'm really just trying to be an open channel. I'm just really trying to be available to whatever energies are moving through me at the time, whatever energies or entities are attracted to my creative channel. Because I look at my drawing as a way of communing with these energies that I can't communicate with intellectually. And I look at them almost as a form of brainstorming or mind mapping, where I process these energies in my unconscious as I create the drawing and as I just spontaneously do this channeled drawing and make these lines and shapes and textures on paper. And I allow these energies to sort of coagulate in my consciousness so that hopefully on the other side of the drawing practice, I have more clarity about how these energies want to be expressed in maybe writing or some other form of creative expression. Because, the main work that I do is writing. I write for Substack, and I also do creativity coaching. So a lot of these energies come to me and they have messages for people that I'm working with or for my audience. And I use the drawing as a tool to process these energies. And because I use these drawings to process different energies, I look at them as energy portraits. And usually the way a drawing will work out for me these days is I will start with the actual energy portrait, which is my main style. That's kind of what you see here. All of the textures and the plant life. That's sort of the main energy portrait. And then usually, but not always, I will come up with these little symbols around the edges of the actual energy portrait that are kind of they're sort of like a summary of the sigil. And sometimes I will separate out these little symbols from the actual energy portrait, and I will use them as sigils in other workings and in other things. But sometimes I don't get any symbols. Sometimes I just get the energy portrait, and that's it. That's enough. We're done. But that's kind of the main way that my art practice works now. And so, of course, now that I've explained it, it will make more sense to people why I don't see a clear separation between my art practice and my spiritual practice. I look at every piece of art I create, whether it's a drawing, whether it's a clay sculpture, whether it's a piece of writing, I look at all of it as channeling, and I look at all of it as sigil making and as an act of magic, as an act of ritual. And the degree to which I create a ritual space before I create all these different things, it really differs depending on the day. Sometimes I will do I'll make a whole thing out of it, and I will create a ritual space. I will clear out the energies. I will energetically block off the space. I'll light candles, give offerings. Maybe I'll do some intuitive movement. as an offering and as a way of bringing these energies down into my body to be processed. Sometimes I really just sit down and I create the ritual space in my head, and that's enough. That is good enough to channel the energies and to process whatever's going on and to commune with these spirits. It really depends on the day, and sometimes in order to be consistent, I really do have to make it convenient. I have to just make it as simple as possible so that I can get it done and so that I'm not spending like a ton of time actually getting to the drawing. So it differs a lot depending on the day, but that is generally how I do it. Without further ado, let's get into my 2018 sketchbook. So this old gal is my 2018 sketchbook. She's a little beaten, she's a little worn, because I had the drawings in this range from early 2018 to late 2020, and that's when I finally filled all of this up. So we flip right open. It starts out, and now here's just like my messy learning process, because I did not realize at the time that there was going to be this transfer, and I just want to leave a note to all of the baby artists out there. Take some cookie sheet, some like parchment paper, and put it between these pages to prevent the transferring. And you'll want to keep it in there for like really a couple weeks, because it can take time for the ink to fully dry and for the excess to absorb. So learn from my mistakes. Make sure you do that. But yeah, it says start at the beginning. And this was my very short-lived conceptual era where I was sort of exploring, more conceptual art. I wanted to like explore some of these sci-fi characters. This girly was based off this lovely lady with dreads that I was following on Instagram at the time. I cannot remember who she was. I don't even know her at this point. But yeah, it says, "Do I have your attention?" I kind of wanted it to sort of like lead in, because I was trying to make something really nice that I would have to look back at for years to come. And I did not want to treat this like a regular sketchbook. Like I really wanted every single page in it to be like a completed piece. Even if it wasn't a perfect piece or something that I absolutely love, I wanted it to be a completed piece and not just like a concept or a prototype. And that was very paralyzing and difficult for me. I would never recommend that going back to any artist out there. Like you really need a place to develop your ideas. And a place where you can really be free and unconfined and experiment. It is really difficult to make good art when there's nowhere that you can make mistakes and there's nowhere you can make bad art. Making bad art is essential to making good art. If you're not trying to make bad art on purpose, you're probably not making your best work. I'm just gonna say that, But anyway, this piece, this was a conceptual piece about me losing my hair. So I lost my hair, I have alopecia, and I lost my hair in, July of 2016, I believe. I actually shaved it off because I was losing a lot of it. I had a bald spot that was growing, and within like a month or two, all of my hair was gone. Even my eyebrows and eyelashes were starting to go within a month. Like I really chose the perfect time to finally just do away with it. And I felt such a sense of freedom after losing my hair that I started to see it in my head as like this hair that I was constantly hiding behind was like gum, like sticking me to the wall. And you can see that she's like sort of in this alleyway and she's like using this piece of glass to look at her appearance, and she's like, this hair is like holding me back from my truest expression. And sort of at the end of the alleyway is this like, oh my God, I'm gonna cry, because I'm just realizing like this was the beginning of my spiritual awakening, and this was like really a vision of what was going to happen for me in the future, because I came out of this alleyway and there was like these beings that I now channel and talk to, my guides, who like who lead my art practice and my creative practice and all of these things. Like, she comes out, she, you know, it's not depicted in this piece, but she like saws off all that hair and she leaves this sort of dark alleyway and she goes into the animate everything. She enters into this psychic world where all of these energies and entities and ideas live. These are all of the ideas that I see like in the ether, that like ideas come to me as entities. Like, I don't always see visuals with them. Sometimes I see them as a color, texture, shape. Sometimes I get words or sounds or movements associated with them, but I see ideas as these sort of like blobs, these thought forms that we reach out into the ether and bring back into the 3D. So, wow, this is amazing to look back at because this picture was really prophetic for like what was gonna happen to me in the future. It's really crazy. So then I have this little piece here and it's just some eyes. I don't know. I think I was like really feeling myself moving through this sort of dark forest. And like, you know, again, I just see in these eyes, I see all of these entities that I was beginning to meet that I didn't even know at the time were separate from me, because I still did not fully have an animistic view of reality. And I had no way to sort of interpret what was happening to me. But I had a lot of fun with all these different like textures and stuff, these like canyon type textures. I really don't do any textures like this anymore. So this is really cool to like look back at. And now this is sort of like an alien city that I drew. I had seen this image of like hands holding up this bridge and I still couldn't really tell you what this means. Like, I mean, other than just, I really felt at the time like I was creating my inner world. Like, you can see me going through all of this sort of more conceptual art. And it was like a big turning point for me in going back into my imagination the way I did in childhood and actually creating my inner world in the outer world, manifesting it in the 3D. And really just treating it with the importance that it deserves and giving it the attention it deserves. This little piece, I created this piece because I had heard the story of this woman who died in the Colorado mountains. And that's really all that I can say about it at this point. I visualized her sort of becoming one with the environment and stuff. And I really felt moved to draw it. So that's Angie. The actual face is not based on the girl who died. It's based on a model that I think I found on Tumblr or something. So after I did Angie, I realized that this sketchbook was too intimidating. It took way too long to complete these pieces. I really needed for a daily drawing practice somewhere where I could get ideas out a lot faster. So I switched to this little mini sketchbook. Like, it's really just about the size of my hand, and it still would take me several days for me to finish a piece even in here because of how detailed my work is. But this is really where I started. I sort of abandoned the conceptual stuff and I went back to my old art style because I just was finding that as much as I loved making these images that came to me in my head real, what I really love about art is I love doing these I call them energy portraits. And so I really just wanted to get back to this way of drawing where I'm constantly getting to surprise myself and letting the art sort of surprise me and come to me rather than me sort of like getting these images in my head. It's just a very different process. So this was the first piece that I did in this little sketchbook. I wanted to experiment with white on black, so I used a white gel pen for this. And yeah, I was really just exploring different shapes and textures. I was trying to get a little more messy and a little more experimental with it, and I sort of quickly abandoned that. Like, yeah, you can see me experimenting with some more textures over here. And then this I did with markers, and I did some like pin textures and stuff over top of it. And I quickly sort of abandoned that style, and there's like some more little chaos drawings. And so this is where we see me really getting back into the way that I used to make art, my old sort of Zen tangling style. So here's like a little chaos piece. There's some more of the markers. And that ghosted terribly in this notebook. It was a whole mess. There's another one that I did, and I don't have dates for any of these, but there's a little, like I imagine it as sort of like a centipede type thing. I don't know. Everything in my art is kind of both animal and plant, so there's kind of no hard separation. And you can really see how tiny all these details were. Like, I can't even believe how small some of these details were. Like, they were really, really tiny. And there's this little guy. You can see that I love sci-fi a lot in all of these pieces, because as I was drawing, I started to see this sort of little robot guy emerge, and I drew his little landing space. There's some eyes that I drew. I love a sad, droopy eye. I didn't finish that one. That was gonna be something, I guess. And here I have this little garden forest blob. Here's another piece. I still love this guy, this like sort of almost coral-like piece. There's another little tangle of reeds. And I still see a clown face when I look at this. And that was a sketch for what was going to be a bigger piece, but I decided not to make it whirligig. And here I must have been practicing, experimenting for what later became this guy. One thing I noticed right away when I look at these pieces in here is that I was still really learning composition, and I was learning how to, like, I think I quickly went to filling up the page, because when you look at some of these, I don't know, that one's pretty balanced, but I don't know, I can't think of a good example. I'm sure I'll run across one, but I was struggling to sort of, as I was drawing, be able to tune into the details and then also sort of relax my gaze so that I could see the composite as I was drawing, and so that I could see the surrounding area and kind of imagine how I wanted to orient things as I went so that I could get a nicer overall composition. And that's why I think I quickly went to doing these full page drawings. But there's one that I did, I remember on Christmas of 2018. Here, I did this one pretty early in 2019 too, these little reeds. That one has a pretty nice composition. Some of them aren't bad. I notice now that I've gotten a lot better with that. I don't even know what that was. And I did this came to me as a swamp for some reason, so I see a swamp. And then here, I think I named this one Oil Slick. I still remember what I was like watching on TV and stuff while I did all of these. I was watching Black Sails when I did that one. And here, this one I called Ragnarok because I was watching Vikings, and for some reason I just really, that's what I saw in it when I looked at it. And here's another like that. I really liked doing those squiggly patterns. I still really love this one too, which, like, compositionally it's really not bad. It is like a full page drawing, so it's much easier to get a nice composition when you do that. But yeah, I really like all these little leaf things, and there's so much rich. I did a lot more shading and stuff back then, and a lot of different layers of shading, so there's a lot more dimension in some of these than what I do now. There's this guy. I was experimenting with a lot of different textures in this time, like these little wobbly sort of textures. So that is where I went back to this notebook, and I made this one at the beginning of 2019 because I really decided that I was ready to challenge myself with more of these bigger pieces, and I really wanted to just challenge myself to let them be messy. Like you can see in here, I'm experimenting with so many different textures and shapes and stuff. Like there's really no organizing principle here. It's really just a clump of mess, like a clump of different experiments and different textures. And same thing kind of here, like I was experimenting with a lot of different shapes and a lot of different textures. And here again, all these different little flower shape things. I still really love that. I love that texture. It's very interesting. And this one was kind of, it's like that one was kind of really the prototype for this one, because this is where I felt like I kind of perfected that, but I also added in these little portal things. And then here's this little, like, almost kind of like an octopus. He's almost like an octopus guy, which is really refining the idea from that other drawing as well. Here's all of these little eye flowers. You can see that, like, because I never had a plan starting out with these, like, they are kind of, the composition is a little all over the place. Like, you'll see that a lot of them are way too close to the edges. There's not a lot of border on them. And here's more of those little bulb things. Really working a lot with these ropey, branch-like textures. Yeah, I was really practicing those a lot. There's another one. I had so much fun doing all these little inner texture things. But weird shapes, very weird shapes. Then this guy. I still really like these like dripping flowers. This one is one that I had designed to eventually be a thigh piece. I wanted to get it tattooed, and now I probably never will, but I wanted to make sort of a moon shape. And then this one, I wanted this to be a thigh piece as well, but then I did not like the overall composition of this. I didn't like the overall shape. It was way too clumpy. And I think I ended up editing out all of these little vines in the image so that it was just that center part there. But I really liked this eye flower design. I started experimenting with it later on in some other pieces. And then I did this one. I was sick as a dog when I did that one. I did this while I was watching The Witcher, the first season of The Witcher. This one too. I think we were also finishing off The Witcher when I made this one. And again, I'm like experimenting with all these different little texture things. Now we have these flowers here. I still love this so much. There was something in this where when I was drawing it, I started to feel this Christ-like energy coming through, and this energy of the Virgin Mary as well. I don't know, it was weirdly biblical. There's this little tree-like thing with the flower. Some more interesting textures. And this is where I return to these eye flower shapes that I did in that last piece. And I really liked the composition of this a lot better. There's another one, more weird flowers that I was experimenting with. I still really like these. This is my fairy queen. This was around the height of my spiritual awakening. I drew this right when I was in the middle of a big opening. Like, I was having intense euphoria after not being able to sit alone in the quiet with myself for years. I always had to have the TV or music or podcast, something going on in the background. In fact, most of the time I couldn't even handle music because even that left too much space to kind of be alone with my thoughts and my own energies, and it brought too much emotions to the fore. And all of a sudden, during the period that I was drawing this, I was spending hours just doing absolutely nothing, just being alone in the emptiness, in the void, and really like tripping on this insane etheric energy that had just like hit me all at once. It was the most massive spiritual awakening I think I've ever had. And afterwards, I snapped back hard. I like shut down really hard after a couple weeks of this profound openness, and I did not experience an opening like that again for a couple years. And that was in March of 2020. This little spiral thing that I was experimenting with. And this I had drawn for a friend was talking about commissioning me for an astrology course they were putting together. And so I found this picture of a galaxy exploding, I believe. And I tried to create all of my little flowers and vines in this sort of shape. And then this here is like just a couple of a different kind of flower design I was working with. I still love florals, and a lot of my work is still very floral, but this was really my floral era. I don't do near as many flowers and floral-like shapes as I did back here. And here was sort of like, yeah, I really saw the wheel of life is how it came to me. Oh, maybe that's like the wheel of fortune. Maybe that's how it came to me. I was seeing kind of the tree of life in a wheel type shape. And I think I even named this the tree of life because that's really what I was seeing. And I saw this sort of as like time threading through each other and reorganizing and stuff. One of the things I've been talking about on Threads lately is that one of my guides is Death, who, after I had seen a bunch of death archetypes and death imagery and death omens in my waking life, they appeared to me out at the creek one day and announced themselves as Azrael, which when I looked it up later, I found out is the name for the angel of death in Judeo-Christian tradition. But the way I experienced death is I either experienced them as this super tall figure in white robes that I never for some reason look up whenever I see them, but I always get this feeling that even if I did look up, I wouldn't be able to see a face. I just see the bottom of their robes. But the other way they appear to me is really very similar to this sort of thready imagery. I see them as these white, lacy tendrils that are constantly shifting and reorganizing themselves. And death has explained themselves to me as the energy of completion and coherence. And they said they were attracted to my creative channel because they said I was trying to weave a bunch of loose ends together to an eventual endpoint. And so I came to understand that death is also time. The frequency of death is the energy of time, and it is constantly shifting and reorganizing itself like these little thread-like tendrils. So that's how death appears to me sometimes. And I feel like this was an early transmission because I kept seeing it as like the tree of life as a wheel and as like this mechanism of fate. So that's really interesting to look back at. And this was just a little experimental texture. I was messing with more of these little tendrils. I think I just did another one of these with the flowers and then some more like little experimental textures. I still really like these guys, and sometimes they still show up in my art pieces. And then I was just refining that idea here because I didn't really like that shape. Here's my "I contain multitudes." I've always loved that. I think it's a Walt Whitman quote. It's gonna be embarrassing if I have that wrong, but I love that quote. And then here I wrote, "I am ephemeral, I am eternal," because that's a phrase that came to me. And yeah, I just have all these little textures and shapes, just experimenting again with different textures and shapes. I'm a big fan of entropy. As everyone knows, that's like a huge frequency of my work, which makes sense, I guess, for a Gemini stellium. I live for the chaos, and I don't see entropy as a bad thing. I see it as like, a force that, decay is necessary. Entropy is a force that eats things that are ready to die. It eats stale and stagnant energies, and we love to see it. We love her. And here I just did my name, Gray Garland. I've been going by this online even since before I changed my name to Gray, because initially I was just thinking of it as like Garland is my last name. Garland can be like a garland of flowers. And I thought of myself at the time, which is funny because now I represent myself through rainbow everything. But at the time I saw myself as a very gray flower. I was like, I'm not a very colorful person. I'm kind of a gray energy. But now I really see it as this very Geminian, gray is a mix of black and white. It is like a midpoint between the energies of light and dark. It is like this ultimate balance, which is a very Libran and very Gemini energy, which features heavily in my chart. So it makes sense that I've been attracted to that as a name. And then here I did this little garden gate type thing, like this like sort of lattice work with all my little flowers coming out. So at the end of this sketchbook, I wanted to put a letter to my future self, and I made this like beautiful frame. I'm still so in love with this frame, like it's so gorgeous. But this letter says, "For all intents and purposes, I finished the sketchbook on or around November 18th, 2020. But until now, I haven't been ready to write this letter. Something strange happened when I finished the sketchbook. I had began to feel uninspired, lost. What message could I leave to my future self? Was I even ready to start a new journey in a new sketchbook? I had been taking art too seriously. I needed to go forget everything I knew so I could start again. It took me 3 years to start over, but the relationship I have with my art now is stronger and more magical than ever. There is no more one art journal to rule them all, one perfect, pristine place where only my best ideas live. But the many places my art lives give me the freedom to let more of myself out. I don't hide from myself anymore. I just spill it all onto the page. I no longer hope that I could be magic. I just know it. I no longer wish for communion with my genius. I simply open up a line and listen for her voice. I want to offer my past self the courage and curiosity to keep going. When in doubt, turn a mirror into a window. Turn into yourself. To discover new sources of inspiration, you will need faith and determination to receive what only you have eyes to see and ears to hear. Love and Lucidity, Gray, January 18th, 2024, 1:33 p.m. So that was the end of the sketchbook, and that was the end of that art journey, at least. So now we get to the sketchbook that I started at the end of 2022 when I was first getting back into drawing after this long break. And so let's take a look. This is when I started dating them too, because I realized the dates of these are very important, you know, and I figured I might want to pull astrological charts on them later. I should have put an exact time for that. I must not have been thinking, but I was like, I just want to see what was going on in my journals and in the ether at that time later and kind of connect back what I was processing. But here I just have like a little line study. There's another little line study with all these little tooth guys behind him. I call this guy the Bone Crusher. I really saw him as like this, almost kind of like that force of entropy that eats decay. Like, I really saw him as this force of devouring and of creative destruction. And here I have, this just like fills me with like Alice in Wonderland vibes. This like Alice in Wonderland forest is sort of what I was channeling here. And I have these big coins. I was really doing some experimental stuff here. And more of these little kind of coin guys, honestly. More coins and little snail type things. I was thinking of those carnivorous flowers when I made these. Lots and lots of coins. I was really enjoying drawing those at this time. I still love this, like more of these enchanted forest vibes. I was really feeling that strongly at this time. And that's when I started getting into drawing these sort of heavenly bodies. Because this was in the lead up to my Saturn return, which started in March of 2023. And so I really see myself kind of processing Saturnian energies here. These two little ear-like things. You can see that this one was done in April of 2023. And that is where I stopped with that sketchbook. And that's where I kind of just stopped drawing for the rest of 2023. And then here are some more from my 2022 sketchbook that, like, let's see. Yeah, this one's November of 2022. This one was September of 2022. So these are two more that I did from that sketchbook. They've gotten kind of rolled up and I need to do something to flatten them. But yeah, there's like two more of those. I did some paintings at this point, and I'm going to show you some of the paintings that I did. So, well, this was one that I did and sometime in 2022. I did that one. So this was also June of 2023. This one, also June of 2023. Have this weird little guy. Some of these are really messy. Like, I'm not a huge fan, but they still deserve love too. I really kind of like this one, honestly. I just wanted to throw this in for fun because this was a sketch that I did. I had seen these anemone at the aquarium and I saw a face in them. So I decided to make my first ever, God, it's got fuzz all over, it's very dusty. But I decided to make my first ever embroidery project where I tried to embroider this guy. And you can see that it did not go completely smoothly, but I still love him. I still think he's cute. So there's that guy. And now here are some more paintings that I did in 2023. So this is also from June of 2023. Just very bent, unfortunately, like, but there's him. I really love him. This is one that I did in June of 2023. This was like one of my first ones back painting. So you can see like it's kind of a mess, but it's interesting. Here's one where I tried experimenting with putting some of my drawings on top of a painting, and I just gave these like a light wash of, I don't think I used watercolor. I think I just watered down some yellow acrylic, and it's like sort of an uneven coating, but I kind of liked that. Here's another from 2023, June of 2023. And now this is where we go back to 2022 because I did this in 2022. I did that one in 2022 as well. And this was also 2022. So all of those were from 2022. I need to get more organized with all of my art stuff, but this was from, gosh, 2020 or 2021. This was back when I was doing all that art therapy work. So now we get into the paint pen drawings. And I started with paint pen in, I think it actually may have been 2023. This is the first paint pen drawing that I did. in August of 2023. And then I did this guy, another paint pen piece that I did. And then this guy was next. I was really just experimenting with a lot of different shapes and textures, just kind of seeing what the possibilities were for paint pens. And I did this guy also in, I think at this point we're in September of 2023. This guy, he is kind of chaos and the colors don't really work together. He's not my favorite, but I will let him have his moment. That's when I really started getting more experimental with things, because I think this was the very next thing that I made. And I did not put a lot of texture on this. I really just wanted to play with the shapes and, you know, really experimenting with layering and all these things. And then after that guy, I did him, and I tried adding a little more texture, a couple of different like smaller shapes and stuff on top of these bigger ones. I did this fella. I still really like these. I really like what I was doing with all these different shapes. And then the next thing I did was this guy. And I tried working on top of this with some gel pen, and I actually really like the way this turned out. I would like to do more of these in the future because, yeah, I really like the texture and I like the way the shapes work together. I love this sort of like canyon-y vibe. Very cool. And then I did this little guy, and this was all in watercolor pencils. That's when I was first getting back into watercolor pencils in like December of 2023. And these ones are, yeah, I didn't date them. So like these ones are going to be from around September of 2023 as well. Maybe a little bit earlier in the summer, but definitely summer to fall of 2023. So I just did these watercolor washes, and then I went over top of them with some of my finer tipped paint pens. And yeah, these are all going to be paint pen textures on top, and I still really like how he turned out. I need to do more of these like watercolor wash ones because the capabilities are amazing. And this is another one of those. This is another watercolor wash one where I really just liked going back over it and sort of carving out these shapes and stuff. And even though like this one composition, I don't know, I would say it's interesting. It's not really that I dislike it. I just thought that there were a lot more interesting shapes in this one versus this one being a little bit more, not quite clump. I don't know. It's just different. It's different, but I still really like it. I need to frame some of these. Oh yeah, and I also did, sorry these are so disorganized. Maybe I'll fix it in the edit. But I also did this one during the full moon in Libra, I believe. So that would have had to have been spring of, I think this was spring of 2024. I want to say that's when I did this one, but I went over top of it with gel pens. These like Sakura Moonlight pens, these Jelly Roll Moonlight pens are really, really amazing. They give this incredible opacity and this incredible neon. I highly recommend them. This one's gotten all rolled up, but this is another one that I did. I think it was in spring of 2024 or maybe late 2023. I'm not entirely sure. I have them kind of scattered all around my little workstation. So here is where we get into the hypersigil journal. This is where I started hypersigil journaling in January of 2024. And so I'm gonna have to really edit around this so that you guys can't see all of my writings because that is private magical working. This is the front page of my original hypersigil journal where I incarnated Pantheon, all holy, and I wrote here the Tao of Pantheon. And it says, born on the eve of Pluto and Capricorn, you will change the meaning of empire. You will help us reimagine legacy. You will reify the old world to reinstate the new world. You will make manifest what is invisible. You will refine the subtle senses that help us ride the dawn. Pantheon, all holy, invested wholly in the liberation of souls and the magic of awakened witches. And here I wrote like some of the, just off the top of my head, frequencies and gods that I was allying myself with at the start of this. And this is a constantly evolving list of frequencies and energies and gods and ancestors, but there's just, and of course we can't forget the queer witch Jesus. So there's like a little forest alien guy that I drew. There's another one who wrote, "The gods want you to be free." This was more of a specific sigil working where I had that specific energy, and that's kind of what I was going off of. And I was going off of stuff that I had been writing above that I will not show you. Actually, no, I will read some of this. It says, "What the gods and guides want is for you to learn their frequency and make beautiful art out of it, something that resonates with them but is entirely your own. They want you to honor them while still being boldly yourself." Now, this is a piece that I did inspired by Indra's net, which the concept behind Indra's net is that like the entire universe exists on this vast net, and each of us are situated on it like jewels. And so we're all interconnected, all time is interconnected. And that's like a big frequency in my work. So I did this piece in devotion to Indra's net, and really through the process of drawing this, allowing myself to deeply metabolize the concept of Indra's net and really like feel into it and see what I could learn from it. And you can see, going back to my older drawings in 2020 and 2019 and everything, that this was really an evolution of some of the ideas I was working with back then. And here I wrote, "Play is very important, very serious work. I am doing the work to liberate souls, and it will not be rushed or ignored or half-assed." I was going through something there. And here is, "Your attention is a magic spell," with this little magnifying glass as I saw it. And there's also an interesting note up here that is not related to what I was drawing down here. At least I don't think, but kind of. But I said, "We trivialize little girls and their diaries and their poster walls full of dreams because we are deeply afraid of their desire and their magic. We fear the power of their attention as earnestly as we crave it." And that's why I wrote, "Your attention is a magic spell." So I guess it was related. Actually, this is really interesting. I got some of these like backwards. I think I was stoned whenever I made this, but this actually ended up being a channeled image from a book on the Kabbalah that I started reading like the next day or something. That like, yeah, I realized I had channeled a diagram from this book. And yeah, all of this was like depicted slightly differently, but definitely it was that diagram that I saw in the book. And it was all of the same like concepts mapped onto it. So that was really interesting. And here I wrote, "It's important to apprentice to Earth," because I was telling myself, you need to clean your apartment and spend more time in material reality. And so I drew this little drawing to kind of stamp that into my brain. And I have some old doodles up there. And this is a little diagram that I wrote about liminal time. So you can see I wrote, "The fertile darkness, where seeds are found and fertilized, where the corpses of the old world nourish the new world. Cellular, new structures are made and unmade, ecosystems transform. All time is concurrent, organized by frequency. Life and death are not mutually exclusive binaries, but coexisting polarities." And then I wrote 12th house void because I saw this place where the self dissolves into the everything, into the world soul, into the collective unconscious, as being a big part of this sort of cellular matrix. So you can see how a lot of the work I do, I look into the pieces that I've created and then I channel writing around it. Like I get messages from the actual drawings. And I don't do as much of that work anymore. At least I haven't lately. I really need to get back to it. But yeah, that is a huge part of my magical practice. And that is why I don't necessarily try to embody something specific when I create my art. I don't necessarily try to see myself in the God self first, because I really just want to work with whatever is there to be processed and to be created from. And this is a sigil that I created. And you can see here some of my sigil making process, where I wrote an intention here. I collapse the time between my present and future self. All time is now. And I took that phrase, all time is now, to further condense down the sigil. And I did a sort of old school chaos magic sigil working from this, which is not how I create all or even most of my sigils. I will just occasionally do it that way. You know, it really depends on my intuition and what feels important to me at the time. But yeah, you take out all of the vowels and then that leaves you with the consonants. And then after I got these consonants, I just wrote out in channeling tower, mountain, south, northwest, because that's the first thing that came to me. And I do really see the tower frequency. I also work a lot with mountains and the energy of mountains in my astral space. So that's interesting to see, because that is kind of something that emerged around the time of this spell. Yeah, so I did this time spell, and I have an enchanted mirror. It's this beautiful little like butterfly mirror that I got from an antique mall, and I put this sigil on the back of it, and I came up with this little spell that I don't actually use it anymore because I now have this sigil in an amulet that I wear all the time. It's that gold amulet that I'm always wearing. But I wrote this spell to go along with it so that I would intentionally show up to collapse the timeline every day and to do this magical working. And I wrote, all time is now, all place is here. I enter this portal by enchanted mirror. I gaze into my own abyss to feed the dream that I have writ. So this was really a magical working to bring all versions of myself, past, present, future, across timelines, all together into one moment so that I could utilize the skills from all of these different timelines. And so like these are all of my little sketches of the sigil, just experimenting with different shapes, and that is the final product. Here's like a little piece that I wrote, like a little, it's kind of like a drawing, I don't know. It said, I felt the grief of the past and the present as if none of it had any bearing on this present moment. And I put my little time sigil there. That was like, yeah, it was like a morning ceremony that I was doing. And that was sort of my takeaway from the experience. And here, like, I wrote a little, because, you know, this is part of the hypersigil. I'm telling this great legend and I'm making it real. And I said, like my past self said, I am become God, master of time. My legend will endure. My power is increasing. I don't know who is, oh yeah. I am warned not to align myself with Prometheus. He was exiled from his spiritual community. That's an interesting little message that I guess I channeled from this. Like, holy hell. I don't even know who Bridget Everett is. I wrote Inanna, what god shall I align with? And I wrote out some gods that I'm aligning with, including Dolly Parton. Dolly Parton is a god. Carrie Fisher, my god, I love that woman. I've read all of her books. Lena Dunham, let's forget her. There are many things I appreciate about Lena Dunham's. You know, as problematic of a person she is, I'm not looking for like pure and innocent people to embody. I want to embody the best parts of even the most problematic people. And there are good parts of Lena Dunham, okay? I wrote God of Audacity because I think I was trying to remind myself, let's not embody all of Lena Dunham. Girl has issues. But anyway, I wrote Joan Didion, Nicki Minaj, Jenny Slate, Julia Cameron, who wrote The Artist's Way, Rabbi Lamed Ben Clifford, who's from the Chicken Kabbalah book. Like, I highly recommend looking into that book because he is an incredible person. Carolyn Elliott, who now goes by Carolyn Lovewell. Caroline W. Casey, an astrologer who has taught me so much about trickster and about revolutionary activity by way of trickster. And RuPaul Charles, the motherfucking head bitch in charge. I also wrote here, my rate of waking precognition is exponentially increasing. And that was definitely the case at the time. Very interesting things were happening. And here's like another interesting excerpt that I wrote here. Where it said, the sun and stars draw their energy from the void. Everything that's burning draws its energy from dark matter, from the void around it. The wisdom comes from nothing. It comes out of nowhere and just serves up. And I haven't consciously done anything, and I see now that's how the universe works. One pull draws from the opposite. And so here are just some crazy ideas I was channeling at the time. It's really interesting to read this back. And you can see more of my manifesting here. My power is so great, I attract the attention and favors of all the gods. And literally, some fucking thunder just rolled at the time that I said that. The gods were like, yes, ma'am. And I said, I am the god of transformation and self-creation. And you know, I am talking a big game here because we're manifesting, darling, okay? We're trying to live into this legendary persona we're creating of the god self. That's what this practice is. So there's a lot of crazy shit in here, and I'm just, you know, bearing it all. I wrote here a little message: don't ever start moving forward so quickly you forget to look back. Here's like a little drawing that I did. It's safe to let people love you, even the strangers of the internet. Let yourself warp and shift like a funhouse mirror. Set yourself free. Being seen is a burden when you don't fully see yourself. Embrace your shapes. And I did this during the full moon in Virgo. I wrote the date and time to actually pull a chart on. There we go. Oh wait, no. That's not when I did this. That's just when the full moon went exact. Here's another little doodle I did down by the side there. Here I wrote the stages of alchemy, and I did like a little drawing underneath it. Here I wrote the associations with the archangels, and I wrote the steps to the Kabbalistic cross down here, which I don't do that anymore, but it's a thing I was experimenting with at the time. And here is another little drawing I did underneath, more info about, let's see, this was Conjuration of the Four. That's what ritual it was, or yeah, the LBRP. The lower banishing ritual of the pentagram. Here's another full page one I did. And then here is a sigil I did that the intention was, I am aligning with the mess of raw creation. My mess is holy, because I was trying to really call in this ability to just get messy with my art and experiment and just throw shit at the wall and see what sticks. And I really accomplished that with this sigil. I still love this, and I love all the textures here. It's very interesting. Here's another little sigil that I did. There's some like funky shapes I was messing with. I never let myself be this free and uninhibited before I started this journal. Like, I really just started doing like just total scribbles. And here is some diagrams that I did. These are kind of like hard to interpret. Aeolian Heart. Yes, this was from a course called Spiritualized, and I was like writing down some notes from her notes on Venus. Like, see, there's the Ankh, which is associated with Venus, and that's how we get the Venus glyph. Yeah, there's a lot of, I'm not going to read all this, but there's a lot of just interesting notes here from what I was reading in that course. It's a course on alchemy. And here's like a sigil I did to attract wealth and opportunities, and I said, I speak this spell into being. I call this reality forth. I breathe life into this dream. I shower this seed with my tears, because a lot of grief came up in this ritual where I made this sigil. I actually did this on the I made this sigil on the winter solstice. And here's just like an example of how I was doing planetary workings with the planetary ancestors. And I said, thank you, Mars, for your blessings today. I dedicate these victories to you, ever your faithful servant, Gray. And I was just like giving him big ups for some like cool things that I did online that day. Because at the time I was doing this little practice from Carolyn Lovewell's wealth course that involved every single day you answer 3 questions. Yeah, okay, so you write down, what is the most profound thought or experience you've had in the last 24 hours? What did you do today to weaken or eliminate a draining habit? And what do you plan to do next to continue to move towards your aims? So that was part of my like composting as part of this hypersigil process. And here's like another little drawing that I did on embracing the mutation. This is just another little random sigil. And this is, you can see that's actually one of my sigils. But a sigil that I did years ago. But you can see, like, I started doing these little symbols around the core drawings, these like sort of summaries of the energetic portraits. And here is another little drawing that I did. Here is another little sigil that I did. There's another one. You can see all of these little symbols There's another one. There's another one. Really interesting visuals that I was working with around this time. Like, stuff started coming out of me that was like unlike anything that I had ever made. Like, it was really wild. Here's another sigil that I made, and this kind of describes the intention of the sigil. I said, I want to share my experiences in a way that illuminates a new, beautiful, creative, and curious perspective. I want to highlight a more rich and embodied way of living, a state from which creativity organically springs. I want to show people a more innocent and exquisite manner of being in the world. And here I made another one. I am blooming, being reborn, and everyone can feel it. Rich, generous, creative people are drawn to me. They want to pay me, work with me, and be friends with me. I am a beacon of aliveness. And like you can see, this was May 25th of 2024. This is when I first started developing a Threads following. So I started developing the Threads following about halfway through April is when stuff started taking off. So that was 3 months into my hypersigil work. It was already starting to take off. And all of these like cool people that I had been admiring from afar for like years, some of them started like being friends with me. And like, so like this was actively coming true at the time. That's what's so crazy. Here's another little sigil. Now this was a dark period. I just want to talk about this real fast because this was right before I cut ties with my past friend and creative partner, who I later realized, and you know, I can finally just say it like it is, but it's taken me a lot of internal work to be able to really face this as being the truth. But the truth is that it was an abusive relationship. It was very covertly abusive. And like at the time, a lot of sabotage and stuff that was happening, I just was like, it was so crazy to me that someone would even be pulling this shit with me that like, I was like, I must just be misinterpreting things, or like I made tons of excuses for them, but that's really the situation. So around this time, I got a couple of spiritual interventions where my guides got in contact with me through some other tarot readers and other means, and were like, girl, wake up, you need to get away from this person. So I was finally coming to that realization, and here you can see I wrote, everything is changing. I am being reborn, but first I have to die. First I have to die. Today I die. There's a dark cast over today like the sky outside. There's shadows on the wall. There's thunder clash inside these halls to rival 7 hells. Like I was going through it. So, wow, this is crazy. But I say, like, I'm seeing sides to Blank's personality that scare me. Things I have repressed because of how intensely it triggers parts of me. I seem to freeze when I try to be with it. Like, I was really waking up about this whole relationship, and it was crazy. So here's another sigil that I made, and I wrote, how lovely to grow wild and strong in the world, to grow stranger every year, stranger to myself. I want to stretch into the soul and fill this form. I want to live this life like it's the last time, then come back and do it all over again. I won't hide from life. I will open wide and let life in. So there's a little sigil spell that I made. And you can really see how my art style is starting to change here. That everything just kind of morphs together. Like there's no clear separation between anything. It's all just like a chaos scribble. And that is the end of the 2024 journal. Or that's the beginning of 2024. That's spring of 2024. This is the rest of 2024 and I believe beginning of 2025. I got a little sparser in here because I was going through weed withdrawals. Yes, I'm one of those crazy people who has withdrawals to weed. It's lovely and I hate it. And I was going through like my separation from my ex-friend and business partner. Also, all of my shit was blowing up online. I was getting like hundreds of subscribers to my new Substack. I was getting like all of these new clients and stuff. Shit was crazy around this time. There was so much happening in my life. I was feeling all of these highs and lows. I had called in the cyclone of change in a meditation totally spontaneously in like January of 2024. And the cyclone came, baby. It was wild. So I was going through a lot, and I had periods where I was not very active in here, and I wasn't really doing much. And so here, this goes from June 25th, 2024 to March 17th, 2025. I also started making these little stickers out of sticker paper. I just print them off, and these are like my, oh, I put that one in like rotated wrong. Anyway, I put these sigils in here because I want to connect all of my journals. That's mainly the time spell that connects all of the journals, but I put these sigils in there to connect all of the journals so that it's this one big like living document. Drawing start here. So here's one drawing that I did on June 16th. There's another one I did for the summer solstice. Here's another one right here. There's another little sigil spell that I did. And I wrote here, I am a born healer, child of Jupiter, rod of Asclepius, which those two things are not related, but I had a psychic session that confirmed a vision that I had in a dream like a year previously. I had this dream of what I later found out was the rod of Asclepius, but I had no knowledge of the myth of Asclepius or his staff. So at first I thought it might be the serpent column at Delphi, but then I later found out because the psychic that I saw said that they found the rod of Asclepius in my spine. And I looked it up, and it looked like what I saw in my dream. So similar, at least, similar to what I saw in my dream. There's another little sigil that I did. There's one right there. There's another one, and here I wrote a little poem with this. Am I the road less traveled? Am I the wandering will? Am I the spirit of things hoped for but not dared to dream? Am I the cold and crushing darkness that gestates seeds of spring? And here I was really trying to hang on. This was in August of 2024 when I was really going through it, processing all this. And I wrote, I will keep the faith and worship the unseen until my dying breath. I was like, girly, hold on. But like, it's getting crazy, but we gotta keep showing up. We gotta keep doing the magic. There's another little sigil that I did. And at this point, we are in October. Because I really was not doing a lot during this time. I'd let go most of my practice. There's another one I did. This is really when I was getting back into the core of my practice. And like, my God, my art style was just changing so rapidly. Like, not drastically. You still really see a lot of my earlier work in these pieces. But yeah, it was like, it was big, it was crazy. And here is another piece that I did. Yeah, we're still in October. There's another piece, and there's one right here. I am a frenzy of furious aliveness. That was my vibes that I was channeling. Oh, it just fills me with so many amazing feelings to see this. October of 2024. Like, here's another sigil that I did. There's another one. God, I love these. They're so beautiful. Like, if I do say so myself. Here's another little piece I did, which I called the morphic egg, because that's what I got as I was making it. There's another little sigil piece and another one. And at this point, we are in November. So there's another one. Another one. This little guy, God, I love these. I'm still so in love with these. It's amazing how much things have changed. So there's another one. And this one was actually a sigil for surrendering to the primal self. I set out with this intention, and I don't think I did any intuitive movement before this. I think I just lit a candle and cleared a ritual space, and that's all I did when I got started. Here's another piece. There's another piece there. There's another piece right there. This was another sigil that I did not set out with a super defined intention. I more received what the sigil was about in retrospect. I felt called to sit down and make one, and then in retrospect, I realized it was a sigil for self-creation, hope, and trust. Here's another one. Really love all these textures, like so amazing. There's another right there. And I really saw this as like, it's some sort of capsule that I channeled here. And I get the sense that it's related to time, but it feels more related to how time brings things into physical being and into the physical world. It's more like the condensation of time into materiality. Here's another little piece I did. Wow, I still really love that one. And I love that sigil down there. I don't know what energy I was channeling here. I know what vibes I get from it, but I can't quite put it into words. And you know, that's part of my practice too, is I don't really need to intellectually understand what all of these things are. I really just follow my intuition on them, and I preserve them in the book so that their magic can do its work, and that's all I need to know. Here, like, I put my printer was dying when I made these stickers, so I got these like really cool results, and I just went ahead and put them in the thing. And here's another sigil there, and another one. There's another one right there. By this time, we are in December of 2024. So I was really active around the end of last year making sigils. There's another one. I see stripper Patrick Star when I look at this one, but I was channeling, this was Saturnalia. This was Christmas Day. So I was really channeling the horned god when I made this one. I named this journal Pantheon, which is like, Pantheon means all holy. That's the etymology of the word. But I also came up with that name, I think. I think the reason it came to me is because in 2022, when I first started active imagination, totally spontaneously, didn't plan it. I was just meditating one day and I saw images, and the first being that I met was this leafy green man. He was like kind of translucent and leafy and green. And he later expressed himself to me as Pan. And at the time, I didn't know anything about Pan, the horned god. All of these can be names for Pan. But I later found out that my ancestors in the mystery schools that they were a part of that worked with Pan, they had their own meaning and their own meaning that they ascribed to Pan that doesn't necessarily align with like the traditional myths of Pan that have been recorded. But they made a deal with Pan that one of their descendants would be a channel for their energy and would devote their life to him. And that gift was reserved through my family line and passed down to me. And when this first came to me, I thought it was just like a metaphor or something, like some kind of like emotional processing that I needed to do through this metaphor, a metaphor about intergenerational trauma or something. But it was later confirmed to me by a tarot reader. Like, all of this was confirmed to me. So now I guess it's just real that the work that I do is in devotion to Pan. It is Pan that I have incarnated in these notebooks. They are the one that I primarily work with. Them and Death. They're like my two kind of main guides. Here's another one right here. I saw Nosferatu around this time, so I put this little ticket in my book because that movie was very inspirational to me. Here's another piece. Oh, I love her. Oh my goodness. These are all very recent, because these were like December. So here's another one. Another one. There's another one right there. And here we are at the end of January. So I did this one at the end of January. Oh, this actually goes this way. Very unusual for me to do a horizontal piece. I don't know why, I just really like doing vertical pieces now. I guess I kind of always have for the most part. Most of mine have always been vertical pieces. And I did this one here. I don't know why I didn't choose to do any symbols around there. Usually when there's an empty space, I'll kind of try to channel some. But yeah, I didn't get any off of that one. There's me and my husband at the Dallas Arboretum. This was taken last September, I believe. There is another little piece that I did. This was in February, the end of February. And that concludes my 2024, early 2025 drawing. This brings us to present day. This is the journal that I'm still working with. So here is the first sigil that I did in April after this like little break that I took from I think the end of February to now. There's another one that I did. Oh, I love the shapes. I love the texture. She's gorgeous. This one is a servitor that I incarnated. And after I incarnated her in the astral, after I birthed her in the astral, I incarnated her with this energy portrait and I made her little sigil here. This is not actually part of the core sigil. It's just like a little additional thing. But this part I actually took out and I snapped a picture of it, edited it out of the rest of the picture, and I turned it into a sticker so that I can stick it on different things and make use of that later. So that's her core sigil. I call her Dionysia, and I'm not going to share what her role is and what her duty is. I don't want to give away too much of my magic here, but there's a little insight, and I wrote her birth time. It's so funny. I spontaneously got the idea to do this ritual, and I just did it as soon as I got the idea, and I happened to birth her in the astral at exactly 1:11 p.m. on the 21st, so this was just a couple days ago. And there's her birth chart. There's another little doodle that I did there, and she was so perfect for the intentions of my spell. Her birth chart was just perfect. But anyway, here is one that I did last night. So this is my most recent sigil spell. No little symbols around it, just the energy portrait. And that concludes all of my sketchbooks. That is all of my drawings and all of my things. And I always keep my first hypersigil where I first incarnated Pan or Pantheon. I always keep it on my altar. It's just become an altar piece now where its energy can be a part of my sort of dominant, you know, if your altar is a representation of you and your magic and your inner world and all the deities you work with, it's really like an externalization of your soul, then of course I'm going to keep my original hypersigil journal there to inspire me and to allow that energy to infuse the rest of the magical workings that I do there. Of my canvas pieces and some of the pieces that I keep above my altar here. And I'm also going to show you around my little desk space. This first one, this was the very first piece that I ever did on canvas. For years, I felt very anxious thinking about wasting a canvas. Which it's like a whole thing. My mom had these nice art supplies growing up that she was always like nervous about wasting them, and that sort of got transferred onto me. So this was the first one where I bit the bullet and I was like, I'm just gonna do it. And I did this one in, I think, May of 2024. So this was after I had started my hypersigil journal and my art style was like really changing and stuff. And so that was the first piece I did on canvas. The second piece I did on canvas was this one. This was the biggest one that I had done at the time, and it was a huge undertaking for me, but I ended up really loving it, and so now I put that one above my bed. And this one I did not do a full ritual for. I did not do a full ritual for the other one either, the one that I just showed you. I really just got started straight away with that one. And then this one, this was a ritual piece I did in devotion to Jupiter and Gemini in July of 2024. And now it may seem strange to want to do a ritual piece devoted to a Jupiter in detriment, but hear me out. I have a Gemini stellium on my moon, Mercury, and Venus in the 9th house. So this was a very major transit for my writing and my teaching and all of the stuff that I do as a coach and all of the writing that I do over on Substack. So I did a full ritual for this one with intuitive movement and everything. And then also Jupiter in Gemini is also this transit has been my Jupiter opposition. So my Jupiter is in Sagittarius in the 3rd house. And I started my original blog where I was writing about creativity and my entire like daily art practice, I started it during my Jupiter return transit in 2018. So this really marked like the halfway point of this cycle that I'm in of developing my art and developing my teaching. So I really wanted to make a ritual object in devotion to Jupiter and Gemini, and this was the product. And now this one, I have showed this in a video before. This one I made just a couple months ago. I think I made this in February, and I have done like a number of these paint pen drawings, but I did this one on canvas, and then also this one right next to it is another one of my colored paint pen drawings that I did on paper. And this one to the left of this canvas piece is a painting that I did in 2023. And that was like my acrylic painting era, which I just don't drag the acrylic paints out anymore. I will probably go back to it one day, maybe whenever I have more time and more space for that kind of thing. But yeah, that's one of my acrylic paintings. But I really want this video to focus on my pen and ink drawing. That is really the core of my work and my core sort of style. That one I did as a ritual piece during I think the new moon in Cancer. And so I did I created a whole ritual space for this one. I did some intuitive movement beforehand, and I just wanted to channel something to describe for me my creative evolution and all of that sort of good stuff. And so that's that one. And here's a fun little bonus. Here are some clay pieces that I've created. The one in the back, I call it my Jupiter tree. That's what came to me as I was making it. It ended up being a devotional object to Jupiter in Taurus, actually. I made that in June of 2023. And over to the right, that is my little Venus shell type thing, another ritual object that I made. To the left, I felt after I made it like it was some kind of devotional piece to Earth. And down in front, I don't know what that is. And for some reason, I really liked it white, so I just left it white. And that little black dot you see in there is actually a green bottle fly that I found dead on my kitchen floor. And he was just too beautiful not to preserve. I think eventually I'm gonna use some resin to fill him in there so he's not just sitting in there. So this is my Sun is the Seed drawing that I was showing you all earlier and talking about the message that I channeled from it. And this is a piece that I channeled as a message about my Saturn return. And both of these were done in early 2023. And these two down here, these watercolor paintings, are some that I did as part of an image making practice in spring of 2022. This one was also from that 2022 image making practice. And this one was actually the very first watercolor I ever did in 2020 when I first started my art therapy practice. And that one is actually also from 2021. This one is from the very end of 2023, and it's just an ink drawing with watercolor pencil over top. And just for funsies, I thought I would show you my little desk area because I've got these little cutouts that I took from an art magazine back in like 2018, I believe, maybe 2019. And then I also have these little crochet flowers that I made. My little figurine guys. And yeah, that's my little desk space workstation. I love it so much. And this is my little desk altar with all my little altar pieces. Some of this is literal trash that I pick up from my walks, and this is my little turtle guy. So yeah, that's what I got going on over my little desk altar.